I remember the day everything split into before and after with a clarity that still makes my skin prickle. It was the kind of chill autumn afternoon that has you thinking of slow things. Tea, books, the steady metronome of normal life. The kind of afternoon you could trust. I had brewed a pot of Earl Grey, the bergamot scent threading through my apartment, and I was waiting for Mark to come over. We'd been together 3 years. Everyone around us assumed we were on the same page. I was the tidy, patient one. He was the charming, restless one with the camera always hanging around his neck and a laugh that made small rooms feel like parties. He arrived with that same grin, hugging me, kissing my temple. He had the smell of cigarettes, despite telling me he'd quit. He had the light in his eyes, the one that turned on when he talked about future projects, gallery openings, and the small, tender ways he made me feel loved. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. It was late when I found the messages. At first it was the casual scroll, the phone on his side table. His face bare of the guarded expression he wore when I asked him something too personal. I told myself I'd look at nothing, that curiosity would be a breach. But the hand moves on its own in those moments. I told myself I would stop after 5 minutes. The first message I read was short, electric. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Your laugh ruined me. It was dated 2 nights ago, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m. My stomach clenched. Not because of the content alone, but because I hadn't been awake at that hour. Because his apartment key was still on my ring. Because we had plans for the morning. Because the words felt like a small blade, precise and unexpected. I read more. Names, photos, plans. A face I'd never seen, a rhythm of small familiarities that belonged to another life. There were images, crowded bars, a hand on his arm, a lipstick-stained glass. There was the tiny detail that broke something inside me. A selfie on a day he had promised to be with me, captioned, "Best night in ages. XX." I don't remember how long I sat there. The tea went cold. I remember the absolute silence that followed every new revelation, like a vacuum. It wasn't only that he had cheated, that was hurtful enough, but the intimacy of the messages, the ease, the way he lied by omission. The way he carried 2 lives like 2 coats on the same hook, and put one on when it suited him. I should have left then. Walked out, slammed the door, burnt the bridges. But there's a cunning part of grief that disguises itself as cunning clarity. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to watch the illusion crumble and measure the pieces. So I watched. I read his social media, the photos taken at odd hours, the timestamps. I mapped the lies. Trips he said were for work, nights he said he'd spend alone, dinners he claimed were with colleagues. The other woman's name was Lila, amber hair, a freelance dancer who frequented the same small galleries Mark loved. She had a laugh that sliced through his composure and left him soft. My brain catalogued everything like a ledger. Dates, places, little patterns that suggested where and when the truth would surface most sharply. The first blow of real-world verification came 2 weeks later. Mark left his camera bag in the hallway when he went to wash his hands. Inside, tucked between lens caps and receipts, was a ticket stub from an underground club 2 blocks from his studio. The date matched one of the messages. I felt like a detective and a traitor at once. I took a photograph of the stub with my phone and put it back. I wanted evidence. I wanted to be sure that I wasn't building revenge on the fumes of jealousy. Now most people go public. They scream, telling friends, posting of betrayals. I could have done that. The social ache would have been soothed by witness and outrage. But I wanted something else. I wanted him to feel the precise extent of what his deception required, and I wanted to be the person who determined how he felt it. Revenge, people say, is irrational. They say it consumes you. They don't account for the sharp satisfaction that can arise when a plan is executed with intelligence and clarity. That is not to romanticize cruelty. It is simply to say that I chose a meticulous route. I claimed the moral high ground not as virtue but as a tool. I would be smarter than him. I would be more patient. I would make him see the world he had built with me and the cracks he had ignored. I began to orchestrate. The first phase was simple. Reclaiming my footing. I went to therapy for the rehearsals where grief is dissected, where I learned to let the rawness be raw, to put words to the animal fear and humiliation. I saw a counselor named Sarah, who taught me to breathe into my wrists, to detach from the immediate urge for confrontation. The second phase was observational architecture. I learned the flow of his days, his habits, the cracks where he had been careless. Lila liked the same late-shift coffee shop he frequented. Mark answered messages slower on Wednesdays. He had a weakness for unguarded honesty after drinks. Patterns are forgiving. They let you plan. I also began to study Lila, not because she was a target of hatred, but because she was, to me, the final point of truth. People make her into villains in stories, but she was likely unaware of Mark's other life. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't. Either way, the person who had the power to hurt him most effectively wasn't always the obvious foil. Often it was the quiet method of confronting someone's life with their own reflected mistakes. So, I started with small manipulations. I messaged Mark, a wounded voice wrapped in reason. I asked for honesty. He knew how to deflect. I brought up trivial moments he had forgotten, testing the seams. Each time he lied, something hardened inside me. I kept records, screenshots, voice notes, receipts. It felt clinical and necessary. The plan that finally collapsed the world between us was not a violent trap. I'm not a monster. It was a social engineering of his life. The slow, patient undermining of the narratives he depended on. I used his talent for image against him. Mark lived by optics. He curated his life for exhibitions and friends. He believed his persona to be nearly unassailable. If I could undermine his credibility, if I could leave him exposed, the humiliation of exposure would work where confrontation might fail. I started by planting seeds of minor doubts among his circle. Not outright accusations. Those ruin lives and are hard to walk back, but precise questions. I asked mutual friends about small things he had told me and noted discrepancies. If someone mentioned an ambiguous comment, I leaned into it with curiosity and calibrated my face to convey nothing but bewilderment. People noticed. People told other people. Humans gossip like weather. It shifts the atmosphere. Then I did something I hadn't imagined I would do. I engineered a public reveal at one of his shows. It wasn't cruel in a cinematic, explosive way. I simply used the truth. On opening night, the gallery was full. Collectors, friends, strangers. Mark was radiant. He gave the practice speech about the vulnerability of art, about authenticity and trust. He did not expect contradiction. He had crafted his world to avoid it. I walked in with intention. I wore a dress he had once told me made me look like a northern light. Cold, luminous. I stood at the back, hands steady, breath measured. When it came time for the Q&A, I raised my hand with the quiet air of someone asking a harmless question. "Mark," I said, voice clear enough for the microphones to catch, "how do you reconcile the honesty you speak of tonight with the messages you sent to Lila, which say otherwise? Do you think your authenticity extends to the people who loved you too?" There was a ripple, that small, exquisite silence that precedes the collapse of decorum. Mark's jaw tightened. His eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, then anger, then the practiced charm. He laughed it off, called it an interruption from a stranger, a misunderstanding. But a few people had seen the look on his phone as he stepped outside to answer an urgent call. A small army of witnesses began to orbit him like satellites, picking at anomalies. He tried to salvage the evening. He floundered. The admirers in the room, always hungry for drama, whispered. The narrative shifted. For the first time, he could not control the light. That night was cathartic in ways I underestimated. I had wanted to embarrass him, to make him taste the social poison he had freely given me. But seeing him scramble, the man who had always seemed to glide, awaken to the heat of consequences was not as satisfying as I'd imagined. The cruelty of public humiliation is messy. Sometimes it feels too much like him. I realized then that I wanted more than revenge of spectacle. I wanted transformation. For him and for me. And if that was too hopeful, then I wanted closure that left me whole. After the show, everything shifted. Mark stopped coming home. He texted apologies. He tried to make the situation about miscommunication, about the pressure of his work. I responded with formal words, calm and icy. I told him I needed time. I told him I was taking chess moves, not hits. He came around with bouquets, with frantic messages painted in the language of guilt. But I had set a new rule. I would not be the person who reacted. I would be the person who decided. One night, months later, when his humiliation had softened to a bruise and he had begun to attempt reconstruction of his life and brand, he invited me for coffee. "Let's talk," he said. "For closure." I agreed. Not because I wanted closure from him, but because I wanted to control the environment. The coffee shop was the one he frequented on Tuesdays, the place with the cracked mosaic table. I wore the same face I wore when I stood at the back of his exhibition. Composed, not cold. He flurried. He was tentative, as if imagining me as a cat who might purr or scratch. We talked about small things. About memories, about the difficulty of honesty. He apologized in ways that sounded rehearsed. He tried to explain Lila. It meant nothing, he said, the words slick and small, and I watched him with the slow interest of someone reading an old play. He reached for my hand. I let him. His fingers were warm, and for a moment the life we had made hummed like a violin under tension. And then I let go. Do you know why I came here? I asked. He blinked. Closure. No, I said. I wanted to help you remember something. He smiled, a reflexive, hopeful thing. What's that? You told me once, I said, that the camera doesn't lie. That it simply captures. You believed that, didn't you? That lenses were truth. He laughed softly. I still believe it. So do I. So I thought I'd show you. I placed a small device on the table between us. A slim recorder, disguised as a lipstick case, something I'd bought with the careful indifference of someone who has rehearsed honesty in private. I pressed a button with the ease of someone who has rehearsed betrayal with the same steady hands. What followed was not a confession in the melodramatic sense. It was a piece of his voice, recorded earlier that week when he thought he was hidden among friends, talking about how he managed 2 lives like 2 separate reels. He spoke about the thrill, about the ease. He said, she thinks I'm the devoted one. She makes me steady. But Lila, with her body and her midnight energy, she wakes the wild. I can have both. He laughed, a small cruel sound that still makes a memory of my bones ache. I let the recorder play until its tiny LED blinked. He watched me with an expression that changed from confusion to horror. Around us, the coffee shop receded into peat. People began to notice. Mark's face went slack. He wanted to say something, a smooth explanation, the minstrel's apology, but the words fell from him like cold coins. That was the moment I realized revenge was not about leaving someone in ruin for the pleasure of decay. It was about choosing what you would do with the power you had been handed by their carelessness. He had given me the truth. I could have wielded it to ruin him publicly, to parade his shame. Or I could use it to rearrange the terms of my life. I chose the latter. I didn't humiliate him further than necessary. I didn't call his parents. I didn't orchestrate a gruesome downfall. I told him simply, you will live with the knowledge that I'm not a soft thing, Mark. I am someone who reads a room like a map. I know where you've been. He tried to explain again. He begged for a career that wouldn't be harmed, for friends who might forgive, for an audience that would sympathize. But he had already lost the one person who mattered. Me. I left the coffee shop with a measured step and a calm as deep as winter water. After that, things eased into a new normal. Mark tried to rebuild. Lila disappeared from his feed as if she had never been. Perhaps she had left once she realized what she was. Perhaps she had been a willing player, perhaps a pawn. I stopped trying to parse the moral geometry of other people's choices. But there was another component to revenge that I hadn't anticipated: reconstruction. In the weeks and months after, while he shuffled through apologies and little career moves, I began to build my life with precision and honesty. I bought a small bookshelf, filling it with books I'd always meant to read. I took a painting class. I traveled alone for the first time in my life to a town by the sea where I sat on rocks and counted gulls and learned to be a witness to solitude without fear. I dated briefly, not to replace him but to learn how it felt to choose tenderly again. The victory I wanted, finally, was not the sight of him ruined. It was the smoothness of my own world, the restoration of my dignity, the quiet knowledge that I could survive betrayal and become someone better. Winning, as it turned out, looked like being whole. Yet the mind is a sly room. Even in victory there are corners that whisper. I would lie awake sometimes, thinking about the lines we cross, about the small compromises we keep for the sake of convenience. I would wonder if, in some small way, I had become what I despised: a manipulator, a calculated strategist. The difference, I told myself, was intention and outcome. I had used my intelligence not to destroy but to disentangle. I had chosen to be visible when others hid, and to demand that the truth hold accountable the person who had pretended it did. There were moments of indulgence, too. Sometimes I would walk by his gallery openings when I knew his new work, quieter now, less demonstrative, would be shown. I would stand at the edge of the crowd and listen to people talk about him in tones that betrayed them. I did not scowl or hiss. I simply observed, like an ornithologist watching a rare bird. He noticed me once, standing like a phantom, and we exchanged a look that carried the weight of what had been. There was no dramatic reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement, two adults measuring the damages of love. People asked me later if I had forgiven him. The answer is complicated. Forgiveness is not a single action. It is a slow weathering of resentment. I forgave him where it allowed me to breathe, and I did not forgive him where the memory burned still. I forgave myself too, for the parts of the plan that felt merciless. Forgiveness, in the end, was another form of maturity. It did not erase what happened. It made me the curator of my future rather than the wreckage of his past. Years later, I found myself sitting on a train moving east, reading a book that was light with charm. A man 3 rows ahead of me was laughing into a phone, the joy in his voice uncontained. I thought, with the strange compassion time affords, of Mark and of Lila and how people enact their dramas with confidence until life gives them a mirror. I thought of the small girl I had been who trusted quickly, and the woman I had become who trusted more carefully. I felt, in that small moment, a fierce contentment. I will not say I never wanted revenge for revenge's sake again. The animal inside me that yearns for justice has not vanished. But I learned the power of smart retaliation, the kind that dissolves illusions without mutilating souls. I learned that winning doesn't always require destroying the other person. Sometimes it requires constructing a life that is incontrovertibly yours. If you ask me now what I would have done differently, there is a single answer. I would have left sooner. Not because the revenge failed or hurt me in parts, it did, and I carry those scars, but because the earlier the disentanglement, the more time you have to build joy. But then again, perhaps the slow unweaving was necessary for me to understand what I could endure and what I would never again allow. People romanticize vengeance as if it were a thunderclap. The truth is more domestic. It is in the quiet decisions. Where you stand, what you measure, when you choose to be seen. It is in the restraint to avoid cruelty for cruelty's sake and in the courage to assert yourself when you have been deceived. On a late summer evening, walking home under a ribbon of amber light, I passed a couple on the corner arguing about something trivial. The man was speaking loudly and the woman, who bore the small tiredness of someone who loves too much, listened with a practiced air. I felt a tug of empathy for both. Behind me, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, an invitation to dinner. I smiled, replying with an openness I had once thought impossible. This, the ability to be available for new warmth without flinching at the shadow of what had been, was the sweetest victory of all. And the memory of Mark? It has settled into an archival shelf, like a book you might pick up sometimes not for nostalgia but for the lesson within. Diana, I would tell her, the woman who plotted and planned, who transformed grief into a map, you are alive. You are sharper, quieter, kinder than you imagined. You won not by shattering him but by reclaiming yourself. You won by learning that the most satisfying vengeance is a life well lived. I used to think revenge had an endpoint, a clean seam you cut along and seal with stitches. But after the gallery, after the coffee shop, after I walked away with my spine held like a candle, I learned that people like Mark don't end. They molt. They learn new shadows. They return. The first sign was so small it could have been nothing. A postcard slipped under my door, the flimsy kind sold in museum gift shops, glossy with black and white street scenes. On the back, in block letters without punctuation, was a question. Do you still believe in cameras? No signature. No return address. The photograph on the front was of a crosswalk caught mid-motion. Heels lifted, a man turning, a woman laughing into her scarf. At the far right edge, a figure blurred by motion trailed behind the rest. I stared at it until my tea went cold. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, a wrong mailbox, a prank. But my name, Diana Hart, was printed cleanly on the label, and something inside me recognized the taste of old metal. Fear. I set it in the drawer beneath my cutlery, as if placing it among knives would give me jurisdiction. That night I slept with a pillow against the door and woke twice to the hallway radiator knocking like footsteps. The second sign didn't try for subtlety. It arrived as a zip file from a no-reply burner. Subject line blank, body empty except for a single link. I don't click things like that. I'm not naive. But the email address it was sent to wasn't the one I give to mailing lists or acquaintances. It was the one I keep only for people who know me well. My mother, my therapist Sarah, 3 close friends. And Mark. I forwarded the message to a work account I barely used, opened it in a sandbox on my old laptop, and held my breath. Inside the folder were photographs. Not of me, not at first. The first dozen were of the town where I grew up. The red brick library, the cracked tennis courts, the little ravine behind the supermarket where teenagers smoked because the employees never looked back there. Then came people. Faces I hadn't seen in years. The soft-jawed boy who'd kissed me in a gym storage closet and asked if I believed things could be special even if you didn't talk about them. Hannah, my best friend, her hair in chaotic braids, hands inked with doodles. And then me, finally. A 17-year-old girl in a thrifted denim jacket, leaning over a chain-link fence, eyes narrowed at something just out of frame. Beneath each picture was a file named with a date and a time, and beneath those, one more, a text document called Notes XT. I opened it. There were bullet points. Not literal bullet points. Someone had made the effort to format them with dashes and indentations, but the effect was the same. 2009 to 2012. Hart attends Overbrook. Teachers: Jameson, Lou, Peary. Best friend: Hannah Price. Job: cashier at Peabody's Pharmacy. October 5, 2011. The detention incident, library stack collapse. No permanent injuries. March 22, 2012. Price's brother arrested. Hart visits courthouse with Price twice. June 14, 2012. Fire behind Peabody's. Rumors of involvement never substantiated. Note: cross-check insurance claim. August 3, 2012. Hart leaves town for university. 2015, present. Hart girlfriend to M. H. photographer. Cross-reference shows pattern. M with subjects he photographs. Hart excluded from late-night sessions. In the final lines, the tone changed. Hart aware of M's duality. Hart acts. Hart chooses spectacle. Does Hart still believe in cameras? My hands went cold. The questions I asked myself were martial precise, the way you ask questions when you refuse to be intimidated. Who compiled this? What was the purpose? What did they want me to feel? What were they trying to make me remember? I thought of the fire. It had been small, contained within the dumpsters behind the pharmacy, but it had been frightening enough to link itself to my bones. It had started because of a pile of cardboard and a boy who liked to flick his lighter like he was testing new gods. It had never been linked to me or to Hannah. Mark didn't know about it. Only 3 people did. Yet here it was, a word in a list, an insinuation like a thread tugging at a loose seam. I closed the laptop and steadied my breathing the way Sarah had taught me. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6. I considered calling her. I didn't. Instead, I took a legal pad and began to map what this meant. The sender knew enough to make me shiver but not enough to do real damage. They were baiting me, calling me into a room I would rather not enter. I wrote in sharp script, "Identify the archivist." Because that's what they were, deliberately. A curator of my past. An amateur historian who wanted me to see myself through their glass. The third sign made me nauseous with its intimacy. I came home late from work, dropped my keys into the ceramic dish on the console table, and felt the wrongness in the air like a changed pressure. It's hard to explain. Nothing was obviously disturbed. My books were aligned. The tulips I'd bought that morning still bowed in their glass. But the smell was different. A faint cologne at war with my soap, a thread of cigarette smoke inside the walls. I found the camera by the corn plant. It was a small device, the kind you stick in a hotel room if you're paranoid or in a nursery if you don't trust your housekeeper. It was wedged behind a cluster of glossy leaves, its lens a black dot, its back magnetized to the plant's metal pole. For a long moment, I stood very still, the way deer go marble in tall grass. Then I exhaled and stepped closer and plucked it free. It was cheap but not unusable. I turned it over. In the small rectangle of its micro SD slot was a card. I didn't touch it. I placed the whole thing into a sealed plastic bag, wrote the date and time on a sticky note, and slid it into my desk drawer next to the postcard. Then I called the police. There is a particular humiliation to letting strangers enter your private rooms and ask if you have an ex-boyfriend who might do something like this. There's a script you adhere to keep your voice from sounding like an accusation. The officer, A woman named Manon with a kind mouth and a notepad she held like a shield, listened and nodded and took the device and told me they would look into it, with a tone that tried to be reassuring and landed somewhere near careful. I gave her Mark's full name without letting it sound like a betrayal. She took it without letting it feel like a promise. When she left, the apartment felt newly thin. I called Sarah. She listened, and then she asked if I felt safe. I answered honestly. Yes and no. I could lock my door. I could buy a new plant. I could install cameras of my own. But safety, I was learning, isn't the absence of blades. It's the certainty of your own hands. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake and thought about Mark's eyes at the coffee shop, the way they'd flared and then gone desperate. I remembered his voice on the recording, the texture of his cruelty, and then the words he used when he tried to apologize, the way his mouth couldn't quite find humility. If this was him, he was different. He had graduated from charm to cunning. He'd found quiet. The fourth sign told me what to call him. It arrived not as a message but as a wall. And not even a wall really, but a projection on a wall. I saw it when I rounded the corner to my street after picking up groceries. My building's brick side, usually lit only by a single amber lamp, was alive with a shaky video. A small figure 17, leaning over a chain-link fence, me. A spark snickering in a cupped hand, not mine. A galvanized laugh, a bloom of orange as a cardboard tower became a nervous star. The video was silent. It wasn't very long. It had been shot from across the parking lot, badly framed, handheld. You couldn't see faces clearly. But you could see enough. And across the bottom, in stark, white frame, a single line glowed. Everything archives. I dropped my groceries. Apples rolled like startled birds. My neighbors stepped outside, one by one, faces rucked with curiosity and then with awkwardness. The projector was across the street on a windowsill, unattended, a small machine humming with rented power. I unplugged it without ceremony. The wall dimmed. The air held the embarrassment of a party where someone has shouted what no one wanted to hear aloud. By morning, the video had made its way to a neighborhood forum and then bled a little farther. A local blog, a thread full of anonymous commentary. The angle and the quality were poor enough that it couldn't act as evidence of anything specific. It certainly couldn't prove who set the fire. Even the timestamp was off by an hour, the date smudged by the camera settings. But still, I could feel the shape of me shifting in my neighbor's eyes. It wasn't a ruin. It was the beginning of a rumor. I didn't care about the rumor. Not much. What I cared about was the message. What I cared about was the author. Everything archives. It was a philosophy statement dressed up as a brand. The archivist didn't merely want to record. He wanted to declare that recording was inevitable, that my past would be dredged whether I consented or not. I said his in my mind before I allowed myself to say it with my lips. His. I believed it was Mark. If it wasn't, it was someone following him. Mark had always had acolytes. Men who talked too loudly at bars, women who preened in front of the flash. But the detail of the email, the precision of the list, the way the question pressed into a bruise I thought I had sealed. It was him. It was Mark with new tools. I went methodical. I stopped going home the same way every day. I bought a second phone and used it the way I once used my first. Sparingly, deliberately. I set up my own camera in my apartment and installed a door sensor that chirped to my phone every time the latch lifted. I put a tiny smear of clear lip gloss on the lower corner of my mirror to see if anyone wiped the glass. I made a list of people who had easy access to my space. It was a short list. Landlord, cleaning service, me. I told the landlord, a man named Igor with shoulders like a coat rack, that my plant had died, and I didn't need maintenance anymore, and I changed my own lock. I also wrote to Hannah. We hadn't spoken in years, not because of any rupture but because time had lacquered us with separate lives. My email was short. Something from back then is being used against me. It's not the truth, but it's also not entirely a lie. Can we talk? She called me that evening with her baby squealing in the background and the particular breathless tenderness of someone who hadn't yet learned to ration her love. Dee, she said. Is this about you know? I could hear her smile. Even in the worry. He was such an idiot, that boy. He always wanted to leave a scar. We talked for an hour. We remembered things I'd tried to forget and discovered new angles to them, like turning a gem in light. It wasn't only the fire she remembered. It was the days after. How the town had wanted a culprit, How the manager of the pharmacy had simpaticoed his way into blaming late summer and carelessness. How the police hadn't tried very hard because no one was hurt. We remembered the camera the boy had bragged about, how he liked to film everything. A true auteur, he'd call himself, watching clips of girls crying when boys broke up with them, saying things like, "This is raw, you know? This is cinema." He had grown up, presumably. Or maybe he'd grown into someone like Mark. Do you think he still has those tapes? Hannah asked. Does that matter? I think whoever's sending me things wants me to believe we are our worst frames, I said. And wants to spook me into playing defense. Are you? She asked. No, I said. Not this time. Good, she said. The baby burbled nonsense into the phone, the sweetest possible soundtrack to a renewed vow. The fifth sign wasn't a sign. It was a hit. A letter arrived by registered mail. It had weight, the way letters with consequences always have weight. Inside was an order of protection. Temporary. The language was starch dry, the bureaucracy of fear. It stated that a complaint had been filed against me by Mark Harrison. It alleged that I had been stalking him, following him, showing up at his workplace, standing outside his building at odd hours. It was bolstered by screenshots of my location data, fabricated, photographs of my silhouette across the street, cropped, and a compilation of my messages to him after the gallery, selectively edited to sound relentless rather than precise. It listed 3 times I had supposedly called him late at night, and provided audio files of breaths and silence that sounded like me only because silence sounds like anyone. At the bottom, he had signed his name with a flourish I remembered from gallery guest books. A judge had stamped an interim order. I was not to contact him. I was not to come within 100 meters of his residence, his studio, or his person. A hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I sat very still for a long time. Then I called Manon, the officer who had taken my report about the plant camera. She listened carefully and then sighed. This is not uncommon, she said. When there's been conflict, sometimes one party tries to gain leverage by filing first. It doesn't mean the judge will accept it permanently. He's trying to dirty my name before I can do anything, I said. Yes, she said not unkindly. And trying to make you careful. Which, from his perspective, is smart. I haven't been near him, I said. I believe you, she said, and the softness of her voice made me unexpectedly want to cry. Keep your records. Keep your distance. We'll see you at the hearing. I wanted to call Sarah again. I didn't. Instead, I opened my legal pad and added a new section, court. Under it, I wrote 3 words. Canary. Mirrors. Patience. The canary was a trick I learned from a documentary about espionage that I watched while sleepless after the gallery. You feed a suspect a unique story, a false detail no one else knows, and wait to see if the story returns to you through channels that implicate them. I crafted mine for Mark with care. I created a new email address, 1 letter off from my own, and I wrote from it to my work email with a subject line that only Mark and I would understand. The body contained something innocuous but specific. A mention of a storage unit I supposedly rented full of old photographs of him, including a print he once told me he was ashamed of. I sent it, then deleted it, then waited. 2 days later, an anonymous account posted on a forum that had made sport of the video projection. She's obsessed, it read. She keeps a storage unit full of evidence. If the court needs it, they should subpoena it. There's a photograph of him he told her not to keep. She kept it. The mirrors were more literal. I began to mirror his moves, not to provoke but to trace. He posted a new series on his social media, a set of photographs he titled Palimpsest. In them were double exposures of faces overlaid with architectural features. Eyes replaced with windows, mouths with doorways. The captions were performatively philosophical. Who are we when the paper shows its previous life? He wrote, as if he'd swallowed a dictionary of metaphors. The series caught attention immediately. He'd always been good at reclaiming the conversation. I looked at the metadata on the posted files. He knew enough to strip it. I looked at the reflections in windows. I found the outlines of the street where his studio was, even though I now was legally barred from approaching it. I found the name of the paper he used in a discussion with a printer on a forum he believed was private. I found the make of the camera he'd upgraded to in the bokeh of a lens flare he hadn't edited carefully enough. I mirrored all of that information back to him in a single sentence, sent from a secure drop he couldn't trace. Your palimpsest still shows what came before, Mark. He would know I could see him clearly without coming near him at all. The patience was the hardest. It meant letting the narrative expand until it reached the ears it needed to. It meant enduring the heat of a rumor. It meant withholding the part of me that wanted to torch his studio with truth. It meant waiting for the hearing. In the meantime, my past continued to return in curated pieces. The archivist sent a clip of me at 19 in a dorm hallway, eyes bright, declaring to a woman off camera that I refuse to be the kind of girl who takes what she's given. They sent a scan of a letter I'd written and never mailed to a professor who'd made me feel small. My signature at the bottom looked too earnest for the sharpness of my words. They sent, incredibly, a photograph of Sarah and me leaving her office, time-stamped and labeled with our first names as if we were specimens. I called Sarah at once. "Someone is filming us," I said. She made a small sound I didn't recognize. "Can you come in?" she asked. Her voice was different, brittle where it had always been velvet. "I think we should talk." I went, because I was either very brave or very stupid, or maybe because being seen while in danger is a way of controlling the light. Sarah's office smelled like chamomile and new paper. She wore the same cardigan I'd always teased her for. Mustard, a color that only she made look like an asset. When I sat, she took a breath, then another, then made the kind of face people make when the truth is a shard and you're asking them to swallow it. "Diana," she said, "I need to tell you something before we begin." I waited. She looked out the window and then back at me and then down at her hands. "Mark contacted me," she said. My fingers tightened around my knees. "A while ago. After the gallery." There are silences that are pure oxygen. This one wasn't. It was the kind that makes your heart start to paw the air for ground. "He contacted you," I repeated, my voice clinical. "Yes." He requested a session. He said he needed help processing what happened. I initially refused. He insisted. She looked as if she would swallow her own mouth. "I shouldn't have." "I know. But I thought I could maintain boundaries. I needed the money." It was wrong. I stared at the books behind her as if they might supply a script. "You treated my ex-boyfriend," I said, "while treating me." "For 2 sessions," she said quickly. "It was not ongoing." I told him I couldn't see him again. "I should have told you sooner." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because he threatened to file a complaint about me," she said, and her voice had the straw of panic in it. "He said if I didn't share general impressions about you, that you were unstable, that you were fixated, he would tell the board I violated ethics by seeing him. He has recordings of our sessions. He said he would post them with your name attached." I am so sorry. I didn't realize I was standing until I felt the rug's edge under my shoe. "You gave him anything?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. I refused. "But I'm telling you because he's escalating. He sent me a video of your building. He called my office line at night and just breathed. He left a message describing the smell of my shampoo. I filed a report yesterday." The room steadied. My anger, which had surged like a wolf through bracken, sat. It folded its legs. It watched. "Okay," I said. "Then we're together in this." She looked up. Something like relief lit her face, and then grief chased it. "I shouldn't have seen him," she said. "You're right," I said, "because truth is a good disinfectant. You shouldn't have. But I'm not going to carry the weight of your mistake for you, either. We're going to separate it from mine." I took out my pad and wrote her name next to Manon's and Hannah's. "He's playing a wide board. We'll shrink it." "How?" she asked, and there was the smallest glint of the student in her face, the one who'd loved learning rules so she could teach them. "By making him feel seen in rooms he can't see," I said. "By using his own need for audience as a leash. He can't help performing. We make the stage ours." 2 days before the hearing, I received a message from Lila. We hadn't spoken since the night I stood at the back of the gallery and asked my loud question. She had vanished from Mark's world like a corner torn from a page. Her message was simple. "He's different, Dee. He's scary now. Can we talk?" We met in a crowded bar where the music was just loud enough to mask conversation. She had cut her hair. The amber was gone, it was dark now, and the effect was like a name change. She looked lighter and older, as if a season had chosen her face to practice on. "He told me you were stalking him," she said without preface. "He told me you couldn't let go." He said you were dangerous in quiet ways. And you? I believed him for a minute, she said, eyes glassy with embarrassment. Because that's what he does. He rehearses his lies until they sound like lines in a play everyone already knows. But then my friend got an email from Everything Archives, a video of me smoking outside my studio, a pixelated zoom into the back of my skirt. It wasn't about you. It was just... She wrung her fingers, then made herself stop. It made me feel like a thing in a museum everyone is allowed to touch. Did you go to the police? I did. They took it seriously. But he's careful now. He learned from before. He's using proxies. Companies with names like Third Eye Solutions. He's paying in crypto. He's hosting files on servers that won't talk to anyone without court orders. The detective said they're linking multiple complaints to an entity they think is him, but it's slippery. Will you testify? I asked. At the hearing. Yes, she said at once. He can't be allowed to own the story. At the hearing, he wore navy. He always looked good in navy. It made his skin look like something you could trust. The courtroom smelled like wood and impatience. A few people sat in the pews because court is public and strangers sometimes like to taste the salt of other people's lives. Mark's lawyer was a woman with an impeccable bun and a voice that could cut fruit. Mine was a man named Elias who wore a suit that needed ironing and a tie his daughter had likely chosen. He was not glamorous. He was exactly what I needed. Mark said we were over and had been for months, that I hadn't accepted it. He said I sent him emails from multiple addresses, that I stood outside his studio at night, that I contacted his friends and tried to ruin his professional standing. He said he feared me. He said he feared for his privacy, his safety, his career. Elias asked him how he knew I stood outside when he said he rarely looked outside at night. He asked him if he could provide the original files for the images he submitted, metadata intact. He asked him if he had ever reached out to my therapist. He asked him if he had ever placed a device in my apartment. At that, Mark's mouth twitched. Tiny. You would miss it if you didn't know that twitch the way you know the location of your own moles. He said no. He said he respected boundaries. Then Lila stood and said a quiet thing. She said Mark had told her he was filing against me and that the words she heard him use were preemptive strike. She said she didn't think I was stalking him. She thought he was trying to sluice dirt onto me so I would spend my energy washing it off. After we spoke, after I described the projector and the postcard and the plant camera and the note about the storage unit that didn't exist, the judge leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said a sentence I wanted to seal in alcohol and keep on my shelf. I do not find, he said, that Mr. Harrison has established a credible fear. I find instead a campaign of provocation designed to manufacture a paper trail. He lifted his stamp and brought it down with an authoritative thump. The temporary order dissolved like sugar in hot water. In the hallway, Mark caught my eye. For just a moment, the mask slid. I saw something that wasn't fury. It was hunger, yes, but not for me, for order. I had disrupted his choreography. He didn't like improvising. He would, but he didn't like it. He didn't approach me. He didn't need to. I could feel the new plan articulating in his jaw. He unveiled it the following week at a live talk at the museum. The same one that had sold the postcard of the crosswalk. The event was titled, Truth and Frame, and the poster featured two hands holding a picture that contained another picture that contained a mirror. He was interviewed by a critic who loved to be seen loving things. The audience was full. I attended, because by then cowardice would have been a kind of oxygen deprivation. I sat in the second-to-last row, my notebook on my lap, my pen a metronome. He spoke beautifully. He always did. He said art was a way to hold what couldn't be held, to make a shape for unsayable things. He said he had been hurt. We all have, he added, humble, and that his new work came from a place of having been misrepresented. He gestured to a large piece on the wall behind him, a multi-layered print that looked like skin seen through a ribcage of windows. Then he did something that made the critic gasp as if the air were a participation sport. He played a recording. His voice filled the hall. It was a woman, emotional, frantic, declaring into the phone that she would ruin him. The critic watched the audience the way a chef watches people taste a dish he knows is too salty. The recording ended. The critic asked who that was. Mark tilted his head, the gesture of a person modestly refusing to humiliate someone who had humiliated him. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. I let the applause wash over me like rain in a car you know is waterproof. When the Q&A opened, I didn't raise my hand. I walked down the side aisle quietly, took the stairs to the stage, and stood to one side. A hush like a cloth damped the room. "Mark," I said. My voice was steady enough to cut fabric. "You're doing it again." The critic's face went a particular color, thrilled and afraid. Mark's eyes flicked to the moderator, to the security guard near the door, to my empty hands. Then he smiled as if we were old friends bumping into each other in the bread aisle. "Diana," he said kindly, "we're not doing this." "I think we are," I said. I turned to the audience. "You heard a recording just now. You were not told who it was. You were encouraged to think it was me." A murmur. Skittish. "I'd like to play you something in return." I lifted my phone. "It's short. It's of him." Security took a step forward. The critic made a stalling gesture, the way someone does who doesn't want the show to end. Mark tilted his head again. I pressed play. It was the breath message Sarah had saved, the one where the caller had done nothing but breathe, except for the last 2 seconds when he said, very softly, "Sarah," and then hung up. I had taken the file to a sound engineer who owed Hannah a favor. He had isolated the room tone, then the consonants, then the breath between them. He had overlaid it with a public recording of Mark from his live stream 2 years ago and mapped the room's sonic signature. It was, in his professional opinion, a match that bordered on certainty. "You recognize the voice?" I said into the stunned quiet. I kept my eyes on the audience, not on him. He called my therapist to scare her into breaking ethics so he could control the frame of my life. "You heard him play a recording of a woman tonight. He wants you to fill in her name with mine. He wants you to decide the story for him." I slid the phone into my pocket. He calls himself an archivist now. He believes everything can be kept and repurposed. But archiving without consent is theft, and theft performed as art is still theft. I'm not here to ruin him. I'm here to tell you he's not an artist of truth. He's a collector of leverage. Someone clapped. Another followed. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't even a wave. But it was enough to keep me from collapsing into the floor. Security reached me then, politely firm. "We'll ask you to return to your seat," one said, and I did, because I'd done what I came to do. After, in the lobby, people looked at me the way people look at a sudden smell, trying to place it. Lila touched my elbow and squeezed. Sarah sent a text with a single word, "Brava." Manon, who had come off duty, nodded to me from near a pillar where she stood looking like a different kind of statue. Mark didn't approach me. He didn't have to. He sent me a message instead, later that night, to the new phone I hadn't given to anyone. It contained a single photograph, a storage unit lock, the kind you cut with bolt cutters when you decide you're done with the past. The tag on the lock read 312. The caption read, "I can always get in." So that was the next move. He would turn my canary into a can opener. He would force the police to spend their time on subpoenas for a unit that didn't exist. He would turn my own cleverness into noise. I smiled without humor, put the phone on the table, and looked at the wall until it wasn't a wall anymore but a surface for diagrams. Okay, I thought. Then we'll change the room. I booked a slot at a small reputable space I'd shown my amateur paintings in once, the kind with white walls and skinny benches and a calendar that didn't have the museum's glamour but had the city's respect. I titled the show, Consent. I curated not my art but my data. On the walls, printed on large archival paper, were images of consent forms. Doctor's forms, release forms, model releases. Each had the names redacted except for one. Mine. Next to each was a small plaque with a story about what had been asked of me and what I had given. In the center of the room, on a plinth, was a single object. The plant camera in its evidence bag, the date and time in my handwriting, the note from Manon authorizing me to display it. In the back corner, behind a veil of beads like a door to a 1970s kitchen, I installed a listening station. On one set of headphones were recordings I had made and collected with explicit permission. Friends riffing about love, Hannah's baby squealing, Sarah telling me a joke about a rabbit who refuses therapy. On the other set were recordings I had received without my consent. The breath on the phone, the sounds of my apartment when I wasn't home, the crackle of a projector spraying my childhood onto brick. People could switch between them at will. They could hear the difference. It was visceral. On opening night, the room was full. Not museum full. Not swarm full. Enough. Manon appeared like a ghost, leaned into my ear and said, "He's at the back." I hadn't needed the warning. I could feel his presence the way you feel a currently hot stove in a dark room. A heat you recognize. He didn't confront me. He had learned. He walked the room with his hands in the pockets of his navy coat, and every time he stopped at a piece, he smiled like a man listening to a language he knew he could learn if he wanted to. People watched him watching. It was a performance, meaning the audience made the meaning. At the end of the night, when the room had thinned and the white wine had done the small violence to my head that white wine always does, he stood in front of the plant camera and spoke without turning toward me. "You have an instinct for spectacle," he said. "I learn from the best," I said. He ran his thumb along the seam of his pocket. "I could sue you," he said mildly, "for displaying my alleged device. For implying." "Do it," I said. "Then I get discovery. Then I get to ask for your hard drives and your emails and a list of every woman you've recorded without permission." He inhaled slightly, nostrils flaring in a way that would have been comedic if I hadn't seen those nostrils close while he lied to me in bed. "You always were good at flipping tables," he said. "It's inelegant." "It's honest," I said. "You should try it." He laughed, the sound he made when he found someone adorably provincial. "You think you've won," he said. "You think this is about ethics. It's not. It's about narrative. And I'll always be better at that. You're not interesting enough." The cruelty of it was juvenile and precise. He knew how to aim. It skittered along my ribs and then fell off. I was tired. I was done letting him name me. "I'm interesting to me," I said. "And I'm interesting to enough people that you felt the need to come here and try to turn the room. That's a win, Mark." He tilted his head, the old tick, the old metronome. "We'll see," he said, and walked out into the night that had begun to smell like rain. The last move wasn't mine and wasn't his. It belonged to a cascade of small decisions made by people who'd been told their stories didn't matter as much as the person holding the camera. A week after consent, 3 women filed statements with the police claiming Mark had recorded them nude during shoots despite having signed releases that explicitly forbade it. One was a model who worked for a brand too small to fight. One was a student. One was a woman he'd dated before me, who had believed he was the kind of man you could build a house with if you didn't mind an artfully messy kitchen. The police searched his studio. They found nothing, because he had anticipated that move and had started using rented spaces. But they did find an invoice to Third Eye Solutions. They found a projector rental for the night my wall spoke. They found a set of scripts in a folder on his desktop titled Control. A litter of files with names like Deterrent XT and Narrative.docs and Preemptive RTF. They found a spreadsheet labeled Archive with dates and initials and notes like Keep Leverage and No Contact, and one cell that read Hart, Canary? With a question mark that looked, to the detective, like a confession. He wasn't arrested. The world isn't that neat. But the museum paused a planned show, pending further review. The critic who'd gasped publicly wrote a softer piece about accountability and the ethics of documentation, naming no names while naming all of them. The forum that had made sport of my life posted a note about community standards and consent. It was too late to make me unrumored. It was not too late to make him less desired. One evening, I sat on my couch with my windows open to a shy spring breeze. I had a bowl of cherries on the table, the bowl I'd made in a class where the instructor told us to accept that our hands would make what they made rather than what our minds demanded. My phone buzzed. It was a message from a sender I didn't know. Archivist no more. It said, "I didn't know he had that video. He pressured me. I'm sorry. If you want, I can send you everything. Anonymous, if you prefer. Or I can deliver it to the detective. Your call. A." I stared at the initial. It could have been anyone. A printer, a projectionist, a woman who'd endured and watched others endure. It could have been the boy from the dumpster's edge who'd grown into a man ashamed of the movies he'd made without permission. It could have been a stranger who'd seen the show and recognized, for the first time, the thick line between curation and theft. "Send to the detective," I wrote back. "And keep a copy for yourself. Keep your own archive. Of what you chose." I went to the window and leaned on the frame the way I did when I was 17. Back when my life felt like a hallway filled with doors I was either not allowed to open or too afraid to touch. Across the street, my building's brick looked like it always had. Textured, honest, unperformative. Somewhere in the city, Mark was still writing scripts, still practicing faces in the mirror. He would find another angle. He would find another audience. But the room he wanted most, mine, was no longer available to rent. Does my past still return? Sometimes. It knocks on the door with an old smell on its breath, asking if I remember the night we laughed too loudly while something dangerous watered itself into flame. When it does, I don't pretend the knock is the wind. I open. I look it in the face. I tell it, yes, I remember, and here's what I made from that heat. And when I sleep now, I sleep not with my back to the door but with my face toward it, because I've learned that monsters are smaller when you turn on the light. In dreams, I sometimes still hear Mark's voice, silky with self-belief, saying, "You'll never be interesting enough." I wake and smile to myself in the dark, thinking of Hannah's baby laughing into the phone, of Lila's hand on my elbow, of Manon's nod in a museum, of Sarah's brava, humbled and bruised and true. We are what we consent to keep. The rest we let go. That finally is how I won, again. Not by ending him, not by feeding an archive of my rage, but by choosing precisely what I hold and what I refuse to carry. A week later, I received one last postcard. No image this time. Just a blank card with a single sentence written in a hand I didn't recognize. Some archives become libraries. I turned it over. On the back, in pencil, almost invisible, another sentence, almost an answer. Only if we let them.